Good afternoon, everyone. Just going to give it a couple seconds to let everyone get filtered in, and then we'll get started for today. Alrighty, I see that number jumping up pretty quick, so let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the live webinar, Adapting Leadership Strategies for Success in Hybrid and Remote Workspaces. I'm Alex Shuretsky, Digital Marketing Coordinator for Annex Business Media, and I will be your moderator for this session. Before we pass it over to your speakers this morning, I'd just like to take a moment to go over a few housekeeping items. Firstly, this webinar is being recorded, so for any reason you have to leave early or you miss part of the presentation, a link to the recording will be sent to all the registrants shortly. Secondly, the audience is in listen-only mode, so cameras and microphones will be turned off for you. However, the chat and Q&A function are open. Lastly, before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our webinar sponsor, Queen's University IRC. For over 85 years, Queen's IRC has been a leader in providing professional development training in labor relations, human resources, and organizational development. Their programs are designed to equip professionals with practical skills that can be applied immediately in the workplace. We're fortunate to have two esteemed facilitators from Queen's IRC with us today, Linda Allen-Hardisty and Deborah Hudson. Both bring a wealth of experience in their fields and are dedicated to helping professionals across Canada elevate their expertise through Queen's IRC programs. If you're looking to advance your career, I highly recommend exploring what Queen's IRC has to offer. Without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Deborah and Linda for their presentation.
Hi, everyone. We're so excited to be here today. Today, we're going to be talking about adapting leadership, strategies for success in hybrid and remote workspaces. And really, even though this conversation about hybrid work has been going on for a couple of years now since the return from the pandemic, it's a very, very hot button topic. And we're really excited to share our view on this today.
Hello, everybody. Thanks, Deborah.
And I don't know if Linda wanted to introduce herself too.
Yeah, thanks. Deborah and I have really started to talk about team and remote and hybrid work quite a bit lately. So I'm really going to enjoy having this conversation along with Deborah. And I do teach at Queen's University in the Org Development Program. And I work with a lot of executives as their coach and a lot of team coaching with leadership teams. So a lot of the things that Deborah and I are going to talk about today will also be based on our experiences and observations of what's really going on for leaders out there who are leading teams and striving for performance in this really unique, constantly changing time. So we decided to start off with what was grabbing our attention. I'm going to pass it over to you, Deborah, to get us going with what the hot button topics are right now.
And thanks, Linda. I think our background is really important because we're going to share about our experience. So by way of background, I'm a labor and employment lawyer, and I actually help facilitate Queen's program on workplace investigations. So, and I can tell you, we're going to talk about this slide that talks about all the stuff in media right now about, requiring employees to come back to work. And I can tell you personally in my law practice, I have employers coming to me asking me, how can we get staff back to work? And I have employees coming to me with concerns about, what does it look like for them to transition back to work, on a hybrid or full-time model. So in the news is a great place to start. So it's been all over the news. Amazon is to mandate a 5-day work week in the office in 2025. This has been all over the news the last few weeks. And, a thought that came to my mind with this particular topic with Amazon was, they're obviously going to lose some employees because of this 5-day work week mandate. So the question becomes, which employees are they losing? Are they losing, the very valuable employees that they want to keep, their top performers who will be able to find opportunities elsewhere? Because if that happens, that's not an effective strategy, I would think. Or are they losing the underperformers, or is it somewhere in between? Do they want this attrition? What is the purpose of that? With respect to the Starbucks CEO, it was in the news that he's not moving to Seattle and he's going to maintain his home, I believe, in California. Linda might correct me on that. And something that strikes me about that header is I'm also, as in part of my practice, I'm engaged in sometimes doing employee surveys. And something that came up recently was we're required, the staff are required to come to work 3 days a week, but our manager doesn't come to work 3 days a week. This is unfair. So something that's come up a bit in my practice, legally, the manager can do whatever they want, and the manager can say, the employees have to work in the office. Legally, that's not really a complicated issue, but in terms of morale, I think then it does become an issue. So, I don't know where we land on this Starbucks CEO thing, but I would ask, is he required to travel all over the world anyway? It might make no material difference, but that's something that captured our eye. And then the last thing is that PwC tells employees it will use location data to police back to office rules. So this is like tracking employees, and it's always been my view. It's not my go-to to want to track people. I don't think it's great for morale. I don't know that it helps performance. I get that it sometimes has to be done, but depending on what jurisdiction you're in, this was in the United Kingdom. I can't speak to the law there, but for example, in Ontario law, you do have to have an electronic monitoring policy if you're going to do something like this. And I'm sure other jurisdictions across Canada have some similar things. So these were some headlines that captured us, and I'll leave it to Linda for her comments on the same headlines.
Yes, I had some of those same reactions too, Deborah. And just to build on what you said, even with Amazon, it really does get to the heart of how do you create a shared purpose and reason for people to be physically together again? What are some things leaders really need to start to think about? If it's not, the purpose isn't there, you've got to figure out what one could be. And if not, people are going to really question what is the reason. And I think there are reasons why you want to bring people back. And I think now that we've learned so much about what is possible and what can be done remotely, the ship has sailed. So how do we really create an atmosphere and really transparent with what we want? And if you have a reason for wanting your employees back in person, then you really need to talk about and develop what that is, because they want to know. So I'm kind of always curious about that. And the location data, this does go to trust. This goes to, are you in it for the best interest for me or for the best interest of the organization? How can we create something that really makes sense? And if it is around performance, there are better performance metrics and things to look at for productivity than data. So I love what you just said there, Deborah. You can have policies for things, and we need to have things make sense with people as decisions are made. And yeah, we can make a lot of assumptions with the headlines as well. And even our federal public service here in Canada is the headlines in the news as well for mandating their employees back to the office. And that's really interesting how that's starting to play out. So it really does get to the heart of, if you are a leader and a manager in this workspace, what are some things and strategies that you can do to keep evolving and strengthening your skills and evolve along with what's really going out here in our workplaces?
So the law slide, that happens to be my slide. But I welcome all of Linda's comments as well. But basically, all I want to say on the law piece is it's actually not that complicated. Quite frankly, an employer can generally require employees to work wherever they request them to work. There's a few exceptions. So if they hire a new employee, the contract should say you have to work from the office located here. If the person was hired before the pandemic and they're still moving in hybrid model, they would just have to give them sufficient notice of a change of the current situation. In some cases, if their contract or collective agreement speaks to location and the employer is trying to change it, there may be legal reasons that an employer can't require a certain location. But I would say more often than not, the employer is actually allowed to say where their employees can work. One more exception might be is if they're moving the office a significant distance. So let's say, they're saying the employees from Toronto, they can't mandate they now work in Montreal. It's a new location. So those are the types of things. But, generally it's pretty simple. If the employer wants employees in the workplace, they can request them in the workplace. That said, let's talk about some of the practical matters. First of all, who is this impacting? So there's a chance that there could be human rights issues. So let's say a person who experiences disability, they may have trouble getting to the office from time to time. They may have a proper medical accommodation to work from home based on whatever their medical direction is. And then I would say, requiring persons to attend on a full-time basis or 5 days a week, that's going to adversely affect certain populations more than others. And a group that I personally work with a lot is working mothers. And working mothers often, bear the responsibility of childcare responsibilities, drop-offs and pickups. Some of them are in the sandwich generation, like myself, where you have elderly parents that you're helping and you have children that you're helping as well. And for people with those types of issues, they may have a human rights accommodation, although it's hard to reach that bar. But as a practical matter, they may just also need more flexibility in order to do their job well. And in that case, we've been trying to talk about, diversity and inclusion and having more inclusive working environments. So by making this rule, what is the purpose and who are we impacting by being rigid about it? So the law is not complicated. Probably you can mandate employees in the workplace unless they can get a human rights accommodation or there's contractual reasons otherwise. But I would say more often than not, those things are hard to argue for the employee. Tons of them come to me and want to argue for accommodation, and it is hard to legally argue. But let's treat people as humans and back up a second and say, is this person valuable to our organization? How can we attract, this cohort of women or this cohort of persons with disabilities or whoever to make this place accessible and welcome to them? And yeah, so I'm interested if Linda has any feedback on what I shared.
Yeah, I really think this really does elevate the opportunity for a leader to really be creative and be curious and learn as much as you can about your employees and what works. And Deborah, I think too, as people start to find the employer that best meets their needs, we're going to see some maybe movement in and out of organizations when they have certain policies or different things that they put in place. So I think really, I love your question. Who is it impacted and where is the element of flexibility in there? But to really, really think of the humans and the humanity part of what we're thinking about. And I think, yeah, well, this is a real silver lining and upside to what's happened, in the past 5 years almost, of what we've learned about working hybrid and remote. It's really given, I think, leaders more insights of how to really learn about their employees and how to really have that conversation. For what reason do I really need to bring people back to the office? Because I think there are reasons where in person is a very effective way to work. And what are those reasons where more individual work can be done remotely? So this does really cause a whole other way for a leader's mindset to really be thinking in a different set of skills to really assess and think about this and make some decisions in ways they never really had to before. So I think it's a real upside that it's really elevating. Yeah, while the law might not be that complicated, I love the way you say that. Here's where some of the strategic and creative and really open thinking can start to happen.
Yeah, and I guess I want to speak to the second point. I do, as part of my practice, conduct a lot of workplace investigations, and usually they elevate to me when it's, something the organization can't handle internally, or it's higher level staff, or it's human resources. But what I'm finding is that, a lot of workplace investigations are just communication issues, and maybe there's no harassment at all, or maybe it's a low level of harassment. But I'm just finding post-pandemic, different generations coming into the workplace, younger generation coming into the workplace, people are communicating differently, often through email and text and not in conversations or phone conversations. And something's getting lost, and then it's getting escalated to a level where someone's filing a harassment complaint. And often, I'm on a few investigations right now, and quite frankly, I just find it sad. I find it sad that it's elevated to this level of miscommunication, and it is not necessarily a productive way to address the issue, because after the workplace investigation, the department's left in shambles and in conflict, and there's a finding, yes or no, and how do we move forward? Unfortunately, like in Ontario, there's a legal obligation to investigate, and they're similar in other jurisdictions throughout Canada. But if we work more in person, if we have that coffee chat at break, if we meet eye to eye, I think some of these communication issues can be avoided. So this is where I'm saying the flip side is that it is important to meet in person, and what are we doing with that time? And I had during one of my workplace audits, someone was mentioning that we're required to go in the office, but we're still having Microsoft video Teams meetings. Well, if we're required to go to the office, let's have that pizza lunch that everyone makes fun of, or let's at least be in person and eye to eye. Let's not do Teams meetings on those days. And how do we do that? We should be structuring our days so that we're in the office on the same days. So, this is very important to effective leadership in a hybrid environment.
Deborah, you've really set this up, and I'll just summarize exactly what Deborah highlighted for all of us is the workforce globally has changed since 2020. And we really need to pause to think hard about that and give that a bit of space and realize just how much it really has. And it's still changing. And this requires new ways of managing people and leading teamwork and taking a different perspective on this. And the rise in hybrid work for remote capable employees has made managing teams and people more complicated. It's more complex now. And there is a lot more decisions I think that leaders need to make when they are working at that level with staff. So let's just take a look at what Deborah's really started laying the groundwork on is the relationship and things that can get lost in certain types of communication. So here's some research that Gallup has done globally earlier this year around the world to find really what is really critical about this relationship with the manager and employee. 70% of the variance in team engagement is attributed to the manager of that team. And also, Gallup does point out that also feeding into engagement, of course, is economic prosperity of that country. Also, labor protections and different things happening there all contribute to whether employees are engaged or not. But we can't disregard the significant fact of the relationship with the manager. That comes over clearly. Engagement is more closely timed to those interpersonal relationships with one's manager. And an effective manager motivates those team members and can help shift them in different ways from indifference to inspired. And that is where the manager's ability to drive engagement through regular goal setting, regular connection, really discovering meaningful feedback and really discovering what accountability can look like and be there. And for those organizations over time that became really highly engaged organizations, what Gallup found out too, following them over time, is it took several years to get there. And it was with a lot of intentional effort of the organization to get there. And here's what made the difference from organizations that weren't engaged to what they did to become engaged over a period of time. It was leaders who built those strong and resilient cultures focused on a couple things that made a difference. They put a real high priority on manager hiring and manager development. These are really honed skills in how to do this. Organizations that did that really upskilled their managers and invested in that. And they integrated into the environment the aspect of team and incorporating engagement in everything they did, whether it was remote virtual meetings or in-person connections. They were very intentional on what is it that we can do to really create that engagement. So with the fact that hybrid work is here to stay, Deborah and I have actually found two particular trends that are really starting to shape and reshape and really be defined and what it takes to really lead right now. Before I leave this bit of data, Deborah, anything to add before I take the next slide for us to talk about the trends?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I can just say from my perspective, a lot of workplace investigations that I do involve, individuals filing complaints against their managers. And so you know, when that's happening, we aren't getting engagement and productivity, that's for sure. And recently I was conducting an investigation, and one of the pieces of feedback I got from various witnesses was this manager used to be on our team and then they got promoted, but I don't think they got any training, and they're great at their job, but they don't know how to do the people part, right? And, you know, that comes up all the time in my work. So how are we training our managers to learn that people part? Because it's an entirely different skill. And so that's an example. And one other example, I was chatting with someone I work with recently, a manager, and he was saying, you know, he's a new manager. The other manager was there 30 years. So it's always hard to take over a spot like that. But he's been meeting for one-on-ones with his team. And one of his team members just said, listen, I just want to be kept in the loop. Like sometimes things are happening around here and they involve our department and I'm not kept in the loop. And what a simple ask. Like what a simple ask. And doesn't that make sense? Goes down to communication and then engagement. So I think that these are, you know, these are on point, and I'm excited for your next slide.
Yeah, we need to keep supporting and growing and developing our managers so we can keep a great succession of the next group of talent into those leadership roles, because these are very important roles. And in the coaching work that I do, I work with a lot of leaders who are reflecting, taking the feedback seriously. They're being curious of how they can learn and develop and do some things differently. So it really is a really exciting time. If you're not in a leadership role, if you're interested, so much about how to do this is still being shaped. So let's look at one of the first of two trends that we're really seeing happening a lot here. The first one is that the future of teamwork is all about learning how to collaborate. I think a lot of people believe they are great collaborators, and I'm sure they've been fantastic collaborators before. But we're really realizing too that it's an actual kind of muscle and skill that needs to be really developed and really taught how to do that, especially with the different modes that we have. But the future of that productivity is really how we learn how to collaborate in whatever mode that we're in. And it really is a new way for people to really function and think about it. And here's some interesting information about having a plan in order to do that. What Gallup also found in their research was that half of hybrid workers on a team had not discussed any informal plan for how to collaborate. Here's your laptop. You can go home these days. Click on this. Here's your Teams link. But no plan in how to prepare, how to carry yourself, if there's a decision item, how you do that, how you engage your employees, screen on, screen off, number of times, when are you available, what requires conversation, when is it better to pick up the phone, and really having a clear plan in what it means to do that. Individual contributors are more likely, so people on a team who aren't as integrated in their role with other people as much. Over half had no plan, compared to managers and leaders who actually had more of a plan. Really shows a lot of gaps. And so the leader's ability to really curate and orchestrate a great hybrid team environment is putting plans and processes and guidelines in place for everyone in how to do that, just not a schedule, but a plan and actually how that rolls out and what to expect. When teams are really physically distanced on different schedules, even here in Canada, if you have a national team, your time zones can, be 4 hours apart. We were just talking about that before we started this. It can be really difficult to cultivate teamwork and culture. So we really need to actually think about how to do that. Deborah, what are you noticing about those organizations that do or don't really focus on how to collaborate, what the plan is, what the expectations are, anything that you've seen? That's
For sure. So I think that sometimes miscommunication escalates when people feel like things are unfair. And I can say a lot of the workplace investigations I do aren't necessarily harassment, but people feel like they're being harassed because there's all these miscommunications. And, I think if the plan was we all come into the office on these days and, there's a why and there's purpose around it, people feel like it's more fair and more purposeful, and they communicate better versus you need to come into the office 3 days a week and I don't. Or perhaps if there's a team working together, but this Thursday, a few different people have different things going on and they're not going to the office. So there'll be teams meeting. Does it make sense to say to people, you know what, the team's not going to be available on Thursday. Everyone can work from home. In my experience, when employees are given, autonomy, and information, and they communicate better, I think it does avoid some of these things that escalate to workplace harassment. And then also people coming to me saying they feel like they want an exit because they've been constructively dismissed. It's all, when things are planned and they see the why and they see the purpose, I do think it creates a much more harmonious working environment.
Nice. One of the teams I'm working with, I've been working with them for 6 months now. And one of the things we're getting ready to put together is a team charter of everything they've learned about themselves as a team and where they want to go next. So there is a team vision in there and a team purpose and role clarity. And we have a separate section all about how we work together when we are hybrid. What are our hybrid guidelines and norms, and what can we expect from one another when we're hybrid? One of the things that this team has noticed in our time together working is how much even checking in with someone, not just waiting for that Teams meeting, can make a difference. And to use a phone, pick up the phone and actually talk to somebody and actually check in different ways. But when it comes to that team charter, it's a standalone item is what can we expect from each other when we are hybrid? What are those times that we want to be in person? And what are those times where individual work can happen remotely? So this is a team that's going to be very intentional in having this conversation about what that might mean for everybody right now. So that might start to get at some of the things where in the scenarios that you just described.
I love the idea of using the phone. I know it's like very old fashioned. I'm aligned with it. I think it avoids miscommunications because, some of the things that come to me are like Teams messages or emails and things, people are perceiving things in a certain way. And I think if you're in a conversation and say you like go silent or something, they might say, oh, is something wrong? Like oh, that's not what I meant. Right. So I think it's great.
Yeah. Emojis only go so far when you're texting. Another group I was just dealing with, the leader on the team, what she's really trying to do is there are times where she meets with quite a large group of people in this province, and she'd like the screens on. And I asked her, what is it is so important to you about having the screen on? And she described to me, it gives her a sense of how is my message landing on people. And she said, it's easier for me to speak to someone I can see their face. So what she's really trying to do is every time she gets on, she lets people know, I would like your screens on for this particular period of time. And here's why I'd really like you to have your screen on. And then there was some follow-up discussions that happened after for those that didn't. And so those are moments where, that's a conversation to have about screens and on and what's the impact and what do we really want to gain from doing that. And then an accountability phone call privately with someone after to talk about the screen and what that can do. So I think we're really starting to be really intentional also about why it is so important that you can see everybody. But yeah, no, don't underestimate just the phone to hear the voice. So here's the other trend. Do you want me to start with this one, Deborah, and get you to jump in with? You've got
absolutely. Yeah, go ahead.
That this team leadership and hybrid skill is a brand. It's new and redefined and reshaping this competency. For those of you who have been in leadership positions for a while, may have done some leadership 360, looking at your leadership competencies. Those that are new into leadership, or maybe some of you are aspiring to do that. When you look at your organization's leadership skills and competencies and everything that you need, this one is either brand new for some, should be new, or just being reshaped and redefined. So a lot of things that Deborah and I are sharing with you are some current best practices, things that Gallup and different research is showing. But I'll tell you too, you'll notice that really we're really challenging you to really think and be creative and really assess what the options are and the impact are, because there is not one perfect set of rules and guidelines on exactly how to do this. But the evolution of leadership is really fostering team cohesion across those different locations, being innovative on your virtual team building strategy, and how much team cohesion is needed to achieve the team and individual performance that you need. That's the question. Leaders really do need to develop the right set of skills. When do I need to bring people into the office? For what reason? Maybe Wednesdays and Thursdays are the days that we problem solve creatively and innovate. And the other days of the week, we're doing individual work. Not everybody knows what they need and know how to ask for that. So there are some new employees who came into the workforce over the last 5 years. They might not know anything else, but there is something different that happens when people are face to face in the same location around mentoring. How do you mentor new people? They might not even know how to ask for that. So there are reasons for on-site in-person work and remote work, and every workplace has some different restrictions and different need. But this is a quote that an executive I was coaching told me. He said, there used to just be one modality, like before 2020, but now there are more. And he said, I've never had to decide before, but now I have to manage performance and lead teams in a variety of modalities. And so for him, it just caused just a new way to really assess and think about things. And one of the things that I know I'm observing too, and I don't know what you've seen, Deborah, but leaders do want to work virtually. A lot of them do, not unlike the headlines maybe that we just looked at. But many of them, especially the ones that I coach, are also realizing it's socially isolating for them. And a major barrier for effective hybrid work is building relationships. And so I'm also people are also being really honest. Like let's accept the fact of what can we really do remotely. Let's accept it is what it is. And let's accept the fact that when we're in person, there are things that are better there. Let's accept what that is and really figuring that out. One young new manager that I was working with in one part of Canada has managers in their company all over Canada. And one of the things that she's really feels is not quite defined yet is all these manager level people around the country. Some have people on site, some have staff remotely. Some of the remote staff are in one geographical area, the managers in another, and managers with each other have different expectations, which confuses the workforce. So for her, she wants a lot more cohesiveness and problem solving to get on the same page with leaders around this whole philosophy. So yeah, it's just causing people in these positions too to really think about the conversations that they need to have. What are you seeing, Deborah, in terms of this new team leadership skill set and what leaders are learning how to do, or maybe if they could do it, it would just work out better?
So I think that the point that you just raised, like some managers might have different policies or requirements for workers, and it's inconsistent. In my experience, when people think things are unfair or inconsistent, that's when sometimes they feel like to escalate legally. So it may not be that specific example, but when people feel like things are unfair or somebody's getting something they don't, then sometimes things escalate. So that's definitely something to watch out for. And in terms of mentorship, like the feedback that I'm hearing is actually that the younger workers do want in-office days. The workers do want mentorship. So I think for those of us, in the middle to the end of our career, we need to remember that. I remember being a junior lawyer, being in the office all the time and having partners take me for lunch or dinner or say, let's grab a coffee. And then maybe I was working on a different case that didn't involve them, but I could say, hey, what do you think about this? And that was a huge part of my learning, or going into other junior lawyers' offices And I think that with remote, that can be taken away. So what does the open door policy look like? Are there days in office for that open door policy? And then are there opportunities on hybrid days for people to feel comfortable enough to ask their one up and their two up, or whoever their mentors may be, for a coffee chat? And I think as leaders, we need to be setting up those appointments, because a lot of, more junior employees may not feel comfortable reaching out. They might not think of the idea. So, something else that, a lawyer that I work with on the other side told me, and I think that this is really effective for leadership. When I was a junior lawyer, we would have the before meeting. So I'd go to the office at 9:30, we'd have coffee and chat. The client call would be at 10. I'd take the notes. After the client call, the partner would sit with me for half an hour, tell me, I want you to do this memo, I want you to do that. If you just invite your junior employee on whatever file, into the 10 o'clock meeting, and they miss the 9:30 pre-game show, and they miss the 10:30 post-game show, they're not getting that full experience. And I think that people need to know, how does this whole thing work? Like, why am I doing this call? So they understand the call more. And then after the call, what do I need to do? We can't leave them in a lurch. They need to see the whole. They need to see the whole process and what that looks like. So yeah, pre-game show and post-game show. I think
I
Linda
love
liked that.
I think that is a great analogy, actually. And any of you wanting to continue this conversation with your teams or your fellow leaders, or what you're going to do about that, get an analogy. And maybe it's pre-game, post-game, and then talk about what that looks like. I think analogies are great ways and fun to kind of link people together to have the conversation. So let's pull some of this together and talk about what are some other practices to really sustain how collaboration can work. And when we say hybrid, we do mean teams that are sometimes remote, sometimes in person, sometimes a blend. When you're in, 5 of you might be in a room together and you've got 2 people projected on the screen. So how this works really hybrid, I think is once again, can be very specific to your situation. So this analogy about bring a brick to the meeting, not a built cathedral. So how do you create opportunities when you have people in person, or if they are remote, to co-create? And by co-creating, we mean have meetings and conversations where people aren't just exchanging pre-cooked thoughts that they brought into the meeting, but they're actually generating new thinking that none of them had before they got in the room. So this is the way to engage, create strength with a team. So when you are leading a team, bring those topics and issues that really need us to build and generate, not unlike what Deborah and I are doing with you today. We had some thoughts, but we have not pre-cooked everything, actually. Deborah, would you say we've kind of built on what we're seeing here? But the great analogy is how do you get people to come to a conversation open, that they're bringing a brick, not a cathedral, to the conversation? And this is from Peter Hawkins' work on high performance teams, and it's incredibly powerful and effective now that we are so hybrid. But creating teams that have that collective sense of endeavor, and what are they here to achieve together that they can't achieve by working in parallel? Those are the moments to have a really engaging, creative, innovative conversation remotely. Even better, those are the times to bring them into the office. And if you as a leader don't have an option, your organization has mandated what those days are, then those are the days you really need to create those times to engage people where they're bringing the bricks together to that meeting. Deborah.
We definitely want like fluidity in approach, in any area. It's good to have, allow people to bring ideas, and we want to feel like we're building something together. So definitely. And I guess, in this respect, every individual comes with something different, and that allows them to bring something that is part of their strengths, and not being too structured about, obviously you need some structure, but allowing people to build on their strengths and building something, even better than you can imagine.
Mm-hmm. There was some research that was collected probably about 2 years into the pandemic around the impact of inclusive environments when we were having Teams meetings or Zoom meetings. And one of the findings they found is when we are in person, there and sitting around a table, there's usually a sense of hierarchy or people have their spots. But when you were on the screen and you see all the squares, what they found in this research is it made things more equitable because everyone was more equal on the screen. And there wasn't a natural, this is my spot, your spot. So when you don't have those choices or you have to be, I think there's really opportunities to leverage kind of what that curiosity can kind of be there. And this is what our final slide here to walk through and have a few more examples. But what we found, and this is really suggested so well from Gallup on how do we reimagine? And my invitation to all of you are what are some things that you might need to consider in how you manage performance, how you lead teams. So to reimagine gave us 4 key steps to look at. And the first one is really plan for this to be successful. So have agreed upon plan for managing what that hybrid work can be. What days are you coming together in person and for what reason? Really create that shared sense of purpose for when you are together and a shared sense for when you are remote. So really explain how this is going to work. The coordination of hybrid collaboration is also really important. And this is the part where a lot of leaders are working with are realizing they've never had to put so much thought into the design or how a meeting would go or how a project would go up until the way it's been set lately. But what Gallup found that made hybrid collaboration the most effective, because people really do need to learn the skills in collaboration. So 67% said regularly scheduled check-in meetings, one-on-one with their manager and then with the team made all the difference. And I always talk about this one too, because I don't want to assume you have them. Not everybody does, but the regular check-ins do make a difference. It's the #1 contributor to effective collaboration on a team. Guidelines, here's the second thing, guidelines for when to be available when you are in person and when you are online during work hours. They talked about that. They had some guidelines for communicating those periods where you wouldn't be available, which I think really lends nicely, Deborah, into some of the things you talked about around miscommunication and assumptions, right? Let's just talk about how we're going to treat that. And guidelines, how often should we work on-site versus at home? If we have a choice there, what does that look like? Specifying the days for on-site teamwork, really being particular about that. And really being, really prioritize when you are doing a team activity, a team building activity, when you're really doing an activity around building collaboration, really calling this out quite a bit. Deborah, I'm just going to pull you into some of the things that you might have seen before I go to the next item on here. But what are you seeing when I talk about the hybrid collaboration and what Gallup found as the #1 factor?
Absolutely. Like, I think I've seen a lot of this stuff, and I've already mentioned some of those examples. Like, people want to feel that there's a purpose for when they're going to the office. So that requires planning. Like, are we going to be in the office on Tuesdays and Thursdays? And what are we doing while we're there? And are we going to be together physically? Please don't send me a Teams meeting while I'm at the office. And so I think that it all goes to the same things: communication, purpose, why, fairness. And I think that as a leader, we need to be purposeful about our days in the office. And, even something as like, where are we booking to sit? Because a lot of workplaces have given up office space. So we need to make sure we can sit in a certain area together. Like, we need to even plan out that hoteling situation sometimes. So but again, I think that people don't want to be asked to do something just because, for no reason. I think that I see escalation in workplace harassment complaints or otherwise employee dissatisfaction when they're just mandated to do something when they don't understand the purpose why. And I think that if you have it planned, and that's when you have your team meetings, and if you have your one-on-ones on the day in office, and if you have your team lunch once a month or whatever that looks like, then people see this is a nice time to be together, and I'm getting some value add for this. I'm getting mentorship. I'm getting face-to-face. I'm getting new ideas. So I think that's where, it has to be planned, and then you're going to avoid those miscommunications that escalate into legal things that no workplace actually wants.
You know, and that really rolls nicely into the third recommendation that Gallup found is for teams to reflect and adapt. So talk about what did we do well in this last year? What did we do well in this project? How did we function with each other in the last month? What did we learn? What was the collective growth of as a team? And 3 out of 5 hybrid workers had ongoing discussions throughout the year on how they improve being a hybrid team member. So that's those ones that were successful and had more collaboration. 3 out of 5 of them had these open conversations. And I know you mentioned this before too, and I think this just really brings it home, Deborah, is we need to upskill our managers and our leaders. Those of you that are in leadership roles and joined us today, this is an example of you focusing in on your own development and time. And I think organizations that do that are going to find that their managers are going to be a lot more confident and able to do their job. Being a leader is an absolutely wonderful time in someone's career, and we want people to come into these roles. And I think also you want to know that your organization is investing in you to be able to do this great job. They found that only 28% were really trained by the organization in how to lead a hybrid teams. So I don't even think, if I were to use your analogy, people would make it past the pregame if they weren't trained in how to do the job. So I think these aren't just, fun, nice to have things. If you want your leaders to lead a hybrid team really, really well, you need to invest and upskill is the great. So it is an imperative to where your organization is going.
I know that leaders really appreciate being invested in too. Like I was helping co-facilitate a course last week, and organizations had paid for their staff to be there, and people were so excited to be there. It was in person. We had social time together. So I think that, investing in managers is important from both a skill set perspective and a morale perspective and all of those things. And there's different ways to invest, and there's different costs of investment and organizations just need to do what's reasonable based on their means, but absolutely invest and train.
Well, Deborah, you and I are working on something. We are collaborating and co-creating over the next few months a new program at Queen's University, building and leading teams. Deborah and I are tag teaming. Be a great experience next year, and we would really like to see you in the program. We are working to pull a great experience together of all the new insights and learnings that are coming out, and how to really lead hybrid remote teams and in person, and really have a fantastic experience for yourself and others in how to do that. So I think the timing is really, really good for everyone.
I'm really excited about that program too.
Oh, it's going to be great. Please join us, everybody. But we would like to know what questions came into the chat that, with our time remaining, we might be able to jump in with.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for that presentation. That was awesome. But yeah, let's just jump right into some questions. The first one that I'm seeing here is an employee moved to another province during the pandemic and is working from there until now. How can they be called back? Are there any legal implications?
So absolutely, I saw this happen a lot. Like I can say around 2021, 2022, people were like, I moved to Ottawa from Toronto, or I moved all over the place. I mean, the fact is first of all, we want to look at their contract and their original deal. But if the deal was like you always worked in the Toronto office, and you just moved somewhere else, there's not necessarily a right to continue to work remote if that wasn't the contract deal. I guess it would be different if the contract says always remote. There are legal implications to somebody working in a different province because there's different taxation and different programs. So like in terms of employment insurance and all this kind of stuff. So I think that it's important that employers know which province that their employees are working from. And I think it's reasonable if they're supposed to work in province, whatever province it is, that they be called back to work there. So if it's a valuable employee and you want to keep them, you might be seeking some advice just to make sure that, remittances are going to the proper places and such, because it is a little bit different province to province how it all works. And I'm not a tax lawyer, so I don't want to speak to that.
Awesome. Thank you. We got another one here. It's a little bit of a longer one, so bear with me. How do we mitigate the lack of office space when everyone is being asked to be in office 80%? Realistically, some staff, front desk admin and front-facing roles need to be in 80% to 100% of the time, but others can be more remote. But due to fairness, etc., everyone is 80 to 100%, and that is hurting our recruiting for certain critical roles.
So the question is that the organization doesn't have enough physical office space.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I would have more questions of curiosity with the decision makers of that organization on how they plan to address that. I know one organization that I know of just extended their how they were going to phase groups back in, and they were phasing them in over time to also line up how they were going to acquire office space. So it did require a bit of a phase in. They had to adjust the timeline, and they phased in the more different roles quicker than others. But that's only one that I've heard of. I think in this situation, it sounds like a decision was and a direction was set with me out, maybe understanding what was really possible yet. I don't know, Deborah, have you seen anything like that, or how would you address that?
I haven't heard this question come up in my practice, but something that, that came up in our presentation is proper planning. So I think that if there's X amount of office space, they need to sit down and like have an actual plan. These folks are coming in Tuesday, like just to make sure there is enough space. And by looking at that planning and those numbers, they'll determine, do we actually need more space and what does that look like? Because if they don't have enough space, I'm sure people would want to a lot of people do want to work from home. So
Yeah, and I think if this person, I'm not sure if they have some decision-making autonomy into this, you might want to collaborate with other leaders, and maybe it's people come in for 1 week a month, and then the next month they until they're, so maybe if there's room for some collaboration and discussion with other team leaders or managers, and tie it back to what does the customer need, where you're going with your strategic plan, what makes the most sense, who needs to be with each other first in the absence of planning until that can actually be acquired. But I'd also go back to what are our stakeholders expecting from us, and what is it that we really need to deliver?
Awesome. Thank you guys for those answers. Got another one here. They're asking, in your opinion, what is the best way to measure productivity in a hybrid environment?
You want me to start? Yeah, Deborah.
Yeah, sure. I mean,
Yeah.
from a legal perspective, like I think that this is not a legal question really, but just from my perspective, and I think that people feeling autonomy and not overly monitored, like I think that it doesn't make good workplace culture to have people keystroke monitored or time monitored and I would say productivity should be measured more based on what are the deliverables for this person, and are they getting their deliverables done on time? And if they're not, are they communicating in advance the purpose why? And to some extent, just knowing when people are available. So like it shouldn't necessarily be that you send an email to someone at 9 a.m. and they don't reply till 4 p.m. unless they're, if they're out, they might have an out of office, but not over monitoring, but at the same time, are they meeting their deliverables and what does that look like?
Yeah, and I would just add to that, I totally agree with that. And this is where what I've noticed is you might need to reconsider how you're measuring productivity. And for those organizations who struggled with performance appraisals and management and performance coaching before this happened in 2020, it's a more elevated issue right now. So my preference is like Deborah, I would avoid any of that monitoring technology or tracking, but find other ways. How well are they working? How timely are those tasks being delivered? And identify the highest priority for that role for that week and check in with them. So identify highest priority, check in with them regular, maybe what are you working on this week? check in with them at the end of the week and at the beginning. So find ways to join them in a conversation, just to be inserted. This is how you can stay active and visible as a leader. Find a creative way to do that. So I would rather see how well and how timely are tasks being created and priorities and checking in for that productivity.
And
Awesome.
like, I know, like, it depends on what the organization's goals are and the role, but like, I know one employee I know is a highly productive individual, and they still are able to do school pickups and drop-offs, which would interfere with the 9 to 5, like actually sitting at the desk, but they're very productive. And this individual's manager thinks they're a great employee and has specifically said to them, you can do your drop-offs and pickups. That's fine. You get all your work done and more than your work done. And they're fine with that. And that might not be conducive if you're sitting at a front desk, doing reception intake, because you need to physically sit there. But for some roles, that might be okay. And I encourage, that is helping, someone who has childcare, responsibilities. So I encourage people to think differently. And some feedback I've got when, employees are making complaints against managers are, we're in this busy workplace. I often work past 5 p.m., during certain quarters when certain things are due. But if it's 4:45 and I'm done my work that particular day, I have to sit at my desk till 5 p.m. because I'm not allowed to leave. Well, does this individual work till 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. when it's really busy at end of quarters or whatever? Can you give them 15 minutes grace if they're not busy? So I think that we need to be thinking about those things. And it depends on your job and work environment.
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you guys. Really appreciate those answers. Got another one here. They want to first say excellent session. So great job again, you two. That was awesome. But they're asking, can you please give some specific examples of effective hybrid tactics you have seen work that teams have co-created?
The ones I listed are the ones that have been the most effective. And one question I got from a conference I was presenting at last month is the challenge they were having were when people were moving from project to project to project and we're on different teams all the time. How do you address that? And so one of the things there is when teams come together regularly, team building doesn't just happen when they first form. It's checking in with them on a regular basis. And if you've got a project team or a team that's going to be together, for a time frame, build in those regular intentional, what else did we learn today? Are we checking in on time? Have we been available? How have we done that? And be really intentional with that. Kicking it up one step, one notch, is if an organization really called up this opportunity on hybrid teamwork. Here are the organization's tactics to this. Create a little bit of guiding principles around that. Then that helps moving between everybody. But one of the other specific tactics on one team was around screens is a big one. Guidelines around that. And the type of topic or problem solving that they bring when they provide it ahead of time with some notice. And when we come into the room, knowing how every single person will be checked in on and pulled in to the conversation, just not those who are highly expressive, but really kind of balancing some of that. So Deborah, would you add anything to that?
No, I think that's good.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, looking at the time, I think we have time for one more here. And this is a good one. Somebody's asking, can you share a bit more about how you would manage the conversation with executives who worked hybrid but won't agree to employees doing the same? And to add, there are others currently having some remote options. So it seems like different positions have remote options and executives do, but not the lower level employees.
This idea of fairness comes up. Like, I mean, ultimately, people in senior management can do different things than other employees. For me, what I think is important is the why. So, like, for example, if someone's working at a reception desk where clients are coming in, they do have to be there like during 9 to 5. That is not a remote position. So that's like the obvious part. But I do think it's a matter of fairness and culture, and what's the culture going to be and how many days are you going to be here, and can we, if you're here 3 days a week, can we then make it that way for the rest of the staff? And if not, what's the reasons, right? And if there's a why, ultimately some people may need to be in the office more than others. Like, that's a fact, and employers legally can do that as much as they want. It's just more of morale, employee retention, productivity and that sort of thing. And Linda can speak more to those pieces than me.
Yeah, and I think the question was how to raise the topic with the executive. Did I get that
Yeah,
right?
yeah, how to start the
Yeah.
conversation and how to kind of address it.
Oh, well, I guess it depends on what your relationship is with that executive, how much direct or one-on-one time you get. But if you do get one-on-one time with him, her, they, I would just openly say, are you open to a conversation about hybrid work and what I'm observing? Just ask, how can we have a conversation about this? I'm just curious. And as a leader, you have to be active and visible, whether that's remotely, in person. And I think Deborah's right. What you do, people are looking, they're noticing. So communicating your why and be really sensitive and aware of what the tone that you're setting. And if you're that person, I would be bold and ask them, yeah, how open are you for me to just pass on my observation and feedback? We have a conversation. You'd be surprised. People think that people in executive roles aren't human and they're untouchable. Well, a lot of them will tell you, talk to me. So I think maybe be bold and ask the question and then be open to what they say.
Awesome.
I love that, Linda, the way you said, are you open? It's an open dialogue, a conversation. It's not a mandate, you know. I think that's a really good way to approach leadership.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys very much once again. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for the webinar today. I just wanted to once again extend a thank you to Queen's IRC for sponsoring this webinar today. Before we wrap up, I invite you to explore Queen IRC's upcoming Building and Leading Teams program launching in April 2025, led by Linda and Deborah. This 3-day program is designed to help leaders enhance team cohesion, drive performance, and tackle the most pressing challenges facing teams today. Don't miss the opportunity to gain actionable strategies and confidently lead your team. Also, just wanted to extend a thank you to Deborah and Linda one more time for their time and presentation today. Finally, just wanted to extend a big thank you to the audience for your questions and participation today. Watch your inboxes for a link to the recording and any resources from today's session. Thanks, everybody. I hope you have a great and safe day.